What's the avatar? There was idols in the Kaaba. Some of your ancestors were Hindu. Is the Prophet Muhammad mentioned in the Hindu scriptures. There is a story, this king, he saw the splitting of the moon. Hinduism is not one religion. Hinduism has a trinity, which is called... And as soon as I said that, the brother was like, Subhanallah, your name was shirk. Understand that Hinduism is one of the oldest world's religion, over 4,000 years old. It actually originates from which country? I begin to question some of the core concepts in Hinduism. The story of Ram and Sita. Who knows how many Hindus there are in the world? Was Indonesia Hindu? Anyone know what dharma is? Anyone heard of karma before? Anyone know what reincarnation is? So what is Holi? What is Diwali? So what is an idol? When you watch some Bollywood movies, used as a form of dawah when speaking to them as well. So what's the main difference between Hinduism and Islam? Everything was good, right? I used to work in Canary Wharf, get those big IT contracts. And it wasn't until like 2008 when we had the financial crash, right? I get a text message and I'm not there. And I've just decided to embrace Islam. So I was like, but it's Islam. It's the Pakistani's religion. Actually, I'm Indian. Imagine that scene. They went to all that trouble. They must have been scared. Like a lot of people that come to Islam, especially from a Hindu background, Sikh background, they have to keep it hidden. You know, I had to basically either lie to myself for the rest of my life and just continue just pretending to be a Hindu. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair for staying behind for this talk. Inshallah, hopefully, mashallah, you guys will find it beneficial. Just before I begin, who thinks I'm Bengali? Put your hand up. Think I'm Bengali? Bengali, yes? Who thinks I'm Sri Lankan? A guy at the back, yeah? Alhamdulillah. Actually, I'm Indian, alhamdulillah, but I get that a lot when I travel around. Alhamdulillah, my name is Salahuddin Patel, and I'm a revert from Hinduism, and I'm going to be giving a talk about my journey to Islam today, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. So, the good thing is, a lot of people, alhamdulillah, are coming to Islam now from a Hindu background, and you're probably seeing a lot of people that are interested in Islam, and also, you know, there's great history when it comes to India and Islam, and I'll be covering some of the points in that as well, inshallah. So I grew up in London in a Gujarati background. I grew up not too far from here, Wembley. I was born into a Hindu family. So I remember, you know, growing up, I used to go to a lot of temples, and I'll be covering that. And those sorts of practices. But alhamdulillah, Allah guide me. I've actually been working in the dawah for over 10 years. The global international dawah organization. We're based in over 30 countries. Alhamdulillah, we had over 100,000 shahadas last year by the permission of Allah. Alhamdulillah, and so we do dawah campaigns. We hire du'at. We have over 400 du'at across the world. So alhamdulillah, it's a mass movement, alhamdulillah, that's happening. Inshallah. All of these popular da'is, alhamdulillah, been blessed to work with them and do campaigns and dawah alongside them. So I'll start with a story. I remember one time going to a program for new Muslims. So where all of these new Muslims from across the UK are invited, different backgrounds, English, you know, you got people that are from maybe a Hindu background, Buddhist background. They all come to this retreat for 4 days. And alhamdulillah, we teach them the basics of Islam. And you have to imagine, like, you know, these new Muslim retreats, new Muslims that come from these backgrounds, they have no understanding of what Islam is. And they're alone, they're abandoned, they're the only ones in their families. So I remember going to one time, and I was an attendee, going to the new Muslim retreat as an attendee. So one of the brothers, he asked my name. He said, what's your name, brother? And I said, my name is Salahuddin. He said, and then he looked at me confused. He said, but I thought you were a new Muslim. I said, yeah, I'm a new Muslim. Revert Muslim. And he said, but that's a Muslim name, right? So how come your name's Salahuddin? Then I explained to him, no, that wasn't my name that was given at birth. The name that was given at birth was shirk. So I had to change it. And as soon as I said that, the brother was like, Subhanallah, your name was shirk. He literally thought my name was shirk. Right? And he was like, Astaghfirullah. But my name, my born name as a Hindu is Shailesh. So anyone have any idea what the name Shailesh means? Any guesses? So one of the Hindu gods, you think? No, it's not one of the Hindu gods, the names. But something linked to that. Any ideas? So the name, obviously, you know, in Islam, there's a principle that when you come to Islam, you don't need to change your name. Unless what principle?
Name is associated with shirk.
Associated with shirk. Yes, brother. It has a bad meaning, right? So my name, obviously, what do you think then? Did it have a shirky connotation, you reckon? Yes? Actually, my name, Shailesh, means God of the mountain. SubhanAllah. And I didn't even know that growing up, you know? Because even growing up, if I knew that name, I would have been like, this is a strange name to have. But this is quite common in Hinduism, right? You have names such as this. So, for example, my brother's name is Nilesh. Any idea what Nilesh may mean? If Shailesh means God of the mountain, what do you think Nilesh could mean?
God of the sky.
God of the sky. Very close, actually. You know that. It's the blue God. Because the sky is actually blue. So very good, mashallah. Very close, right? So that's me, you know, alhamdulillah. You know, my born name was Shailesh. I changed it to Salahuddin, alhamdulillah. But let's start with some facts regarding Hinduism. So, do any of you guys know any Hindus?
Yes.
Put your hand up if you know any Hindus. Put your hand up if there are any Hindus in your local area. Loads, right? Who knows how many Hindus there are in the world? Any idea? So 100,000. And what did you say?
250 million.
250 million. Okay. Any other offers?
1 billion and more.
1 billion and more. Anyone else? It's actually, you're quite close. It's 1.25 billion. SubhanAllah. Brothers and sisters, I want you to just imagine about that number right now. 1.25 billion Hindus in the world. That's a quarter of the world's population. SubhanAllah. And they are practicing Hinduism, or they recognize themselves from a Hindu background, you know. Anyone know how many Hindus are in London? Or UK, sorry, not in London, in UK. Any guesses? A million? 1.5. You're actually right, 1 million. So imagine there's 1 million Hindus in the UK, right? And of course, you know, we just had the general election, and the outgoing Prime Minister was Rishi Sunak, right? And he comes from a Hindu background himself, right? So understand that when it comes to world religions, you've got Christianity just by number at the top. Then you have Islam, alhamdulillah, number 2. But the third biggest religion in the world is Hinduism. Imagine that, right? So there's a lot of people out there that are Hindus, that are practicing Hindus, and a lot of them are based in the UK. So, you know, Hindu, it actually originates from which country? India, obviously, right? India, and that's where the largest population is. But there are, you know, major populations of Hindus in Europe, in America, in Australia, all across the world. You find them, right? And so this is the religion that I grew up into, obviously. So I grew up at a very different time, like most of us here. I can see a lot of older faces. So I grew up in the 1980s. Who can remember the 1980s? You can, yeah? He's laughing. The uncle is laughing because he understands. The world was completely different, right? There was no internet. There was no internet in the 1980s, right? So imagine you had to live your life without any internet. There was no smartphones, right? When it came to TV channels, there was only like 4 TV channels. right? You didn't have Sky TV, you didn't have all of this choice. The old telephones that you'd have in your house, they used to be the ones where you used to dial with turning the ringer. Has anyone seen those? Right? You may have seen some of those YouTube videos now where they try and get these young kids to put the phone in front of them and say, look, I want you to try and use this. And they're just baffled. They have no idea how this technology works. But that's how it was, you know. And, you know, the 80s was a very different place because, you know, growing up, I remember you were allowed to just disappear from the house and your parents wouldn't know where you were. You'd go to the park. The rule was just to come home before the street lights came on, right? And so your parents wouldn't know where you are. And again, even people that go out to work, they weren't in constant communication, right? And so this was the 1980s, and alhamdulillah, I have a lot of fond memories. And obviously, linked to that, you know, I grew up in a Hindu background in Wembley where there's a Hindu population. So when it comes to Hinduism, understand that Hinduism, they say, is one of the oldest world's religions, right? Over 4,000 years old, right? So it has deep roots in history and in civilization. And obviously we trace it back to the Indian subcontinent. And what's interesting is when I look around at the faces here, who is actually here from the Indian subcontinent, like in terms of their heritage? Like 90% of you guys, right? And I guarantee you, right, that most of you, when you trace back your lineage, you'll probably find that some of your ancestors were Hindu. Most likely, you know? I remember speaking to a brother in the office, and you know you can do these DNA tests, right? And he did a DNA test, but he also you had a family tree. I think it was a tradition where you would write down, you know, the ancestors of your families and trace it back. So his family tree, he traced it back, and he went back to an individual called Kalu. And Kalu was a Hindu guy, was a person that embraced Islam. And then all of his heritage comes from that. So you guys, you know, coming from an Indian subcontinent, that's probably what happened. One of your ancestors embraced Islam. And alhamdulillah, you guys are now Muslim today. You know, I want you just to think about that, subhanAllah. Because India was not Muslim, right? Islam came, you know, not long or during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, depending on what people say about the history. It came on quite early on, and it's been in India for over 1,000 years. But the majority of the people were practicing Hindus, right? So when it comes to Hinduism, what people don't really understand is it doesn't have a specific founder. It's based more on philosophical ideas that have come over time, right? So it has practices, traditions. The main moral ethics that it takes from is from an idea called dharma. Anyone know what dharma is? Any ideas? Dharma? Ever heard of the word dharma before? You have? Maybe like when you watch some Bollywood movies, you may have come across that. It's religion. It's like the morals and the ethics that a person conducts their life by. And so a Hindu would follow what's known as dharma, you know. That will give them the guide. But they also have what's known as karma, which is linked to dharma. Anyone heard of karma before? Any ideas what it means? Actions, yes, absolutely. Right? So they have this idea that your life is determined by the actions that you do. And what they also believe is this thing that if you do good to someone, or if you do good, that good will come back to you. But if you do bad, bad will come back to you. So when you sort of reflect and when you think about these things, very similar concepts to what we believe in Islam. You know, living a good life, having morals and ethics. Your life is determined by your actions, your karma, right? So these are some of the ways that, you know, Hindus sort of practice the religion in terms of the philosophy. They also believe in something called as reincarnation, which is obviously different to what we believe in Islam. Anyone know what reincarnation is?
Being born again.
Being born again, right? But specifically in Hinduism, how do they determine that? Yeah, so they have this framework, right, that determines your actions in life. So they believe in this idea of death and rebirth, the cycle, right? And so when you die, like you said, mashallah, is that if you lived a good life, then you would get rewarded in the next life by coming back maybe as a better, person. But if you did something bad, then you would get degraded down to a lesser life form, right, as a form of punishment. So if you reflect, as a Muslim, obviously we don't believe that, but the understanding of trying to live a good life and do good actions is very similar, right? Because if you live a good life in Islam, if you obey Allah, if you focus on your ibadah, fulfill your purpose, what is Allah going to do? He will reward you, right? But if you live the bad life, if you commit shirk, if you don't do your ibadah, if you do bad deeds, what will happen? Allah will punish you, right? So they have very similar concepts again, but again, the final destination is different. It's good to understand these things because obviously when you're talking to a person from a Hindu background, you can understand some of the basic concepts that they believe in, but also as a frame of reference, what you can then use as a form of dawah when speaking to them as well. Things that they can relate to. So who can name me some of the religious festivals that Hindus perform? Holi, Diwali. Okay, let's start with Holi.
Navratri.
So what is Holi?
Holi is the festival of colors.
Okay, good. Anyone else? You said Diwali as well?
Diwali, yes, which is light.
Okay. Anyone else want to, let's give someone else a chance to speak. Any other festivals? So Diwali, who's heard of Diwali? Put your hand up. Yes, brother. What is it? What is Diwali?
No idea.
No idea. What about you, brother?
Is it Hindu New Year, something like this?
Okay, New Year's. Any other ideas? The Festival of Light. Do you know what it represents? Okay, so Diwali is a major Hindu celebration where they basically celebrate. Have you heard of an idol called Ram and Sita? The story of Ram and Sita, right? So it's there to commemorate Ram overcoming the devil, or one of the devils, Ravan, saving his wife, and then to celebrate the journey home, you have the Festival of Light. So again, it's this idea of good overcoming evil, right? And again, signified by light. Again, obviously a major Hindu festival. You see a lot of Hindus celebrate that here. You hear a lot of fireworks during that period, right? But again, this is one of their festivals. Like you said, Navratri is another one where they basically have a festival. And like you said, there's also Holi. There's also one called Raksha Bandhan. Anyone heard of Raksha Bandhan? Okay, Uncle Mashallah, you know your stuff, bro.
I spend a lot of time.
Mashallah, tell us about Raksha Bandhan, inshallah.
Celebrate brother and sisterhood.
Yes, good. So it's there to celebrate brotherhood and sisterhood. And so what they do is the brothers would get like a band tied around their wrist, okay, as a sign of respect. And then the brothers would give a gift in return. Again, to show bonds of kinship between siblings, respect your brothers and your sisters. So when you look at the surface of it, they have a lot of these festivals, a lot of these practices that have, we can relate to in Islam, right? These concepts and these understandings. So I remember going and, growing up in Wembley, going to the temple during these celebrations, and it'll be an opportunity where you would go and meet your relatives So it'd be exciting. You would dress up. And so it's something that, I would look forward to as a kid. The Hindu community itself is very close-knit community. So they do a lot of social activities together. And so it's very sort of integrated. And so it's fun when you have these activities as a kid, right? And so you have this sense of community with the Hindus. And of course, a lot of us or our parents are from India, and whether, and in India, a lot of the sort of main religions there are Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism. So your parents would probably experience these sort of traditions and these celebrations probably more in terms of what was happening in India. So I remember going to Birmingham, Leicester, visiting the temples in Watford and Neasden. And so as a child, just like anyone else, you don't question your parents' religion, right? You follow, right? Did you question your religion when you were growing up? You guys? Or did you just follow when Eid would come and, the celebrations? You'd follow because you see your parents as an authority. So it's no difference, with people of different religions as a child growing up. But I remember, because we live in London, alhamdulillah, and the UK, which is such a diverse community, you get people from all different sorts of backgrounds. You got Christians, Muslims, you got Buddhists, you got Sikhs, right? And you have all of this mix. So growing up in school, you would come across people from all different backgrounds. And so for me, when I was getting a bit older, maybe like when I reached secondary school, some of these concepts and these ideas in Hinduism just sort of didn't start making any sense, right? And so I remember looking at some of these idols, and for me personally, some of them are really scary, right? Because they're like very vibrant in color, big, and they would have like weapons, some of them will be holding weapons, and so it would be very scary. But then I began to question some of the core concepts in Hinduism, because here, alhamdulillah, we get to have this, ability to critically assess things, right? And so does anyone know any of the sort of main core theological concepts in Hinduism that's different from, let's say, monotheistic religions? So what's the main difference between Hinduism, let's say, and Islam? Idol worship. So they have this idea of idolatry, right? So you have all of these idols. So what is an idol? Handmade, okay. Handmade, but it's not just anything, because this could be handmade. Sorry? It's a representation of God. Yes, good. Right? So you have these idols that are representations of God. But is there only one idol or are there many idols? Many, right? So this is another difference between Islam and Hinduism. In Hinduism, you have multiple gods. They may attribute to one all-powerful God, right? But ultimately, the way they worship. So who can tell me some of these idols? I can. Yes? Give me one then. You can give me one at least. Kali. Okay. What is Kali, the idol of? Yes, tell me about Kali. Vengeance, yeah? So vengeance and sort of fighting. So Kali is like it's a idol that is a woman, right? In Hinduism. Yes, any other idols in Hinduism? Saraswati. So what is Saraswati? Wisdom. Okay, good. Any men idols? We've named two. Hanuman and Ram. So what's Hanuman? Okay, good. So in Hinduism, you have Hanuman, right? And this is a god that is there's a story behind it, but he's like a monkey god. And in the story of Ram and Sita, that Hanuman actually helps Ram and Sita overcome Ravan, right? So again, you have a depiction of a monkey and as a god, right? And then you have many others. You have Ram, like we mentioned, Krishna. Anyone heard of Krishna? Yeah. Like, so when I was just driving, we saw some some of the shops with like Hindu names. So I can see there's a Hindu community locally here as well. Is that right? Yeah, very big. Yes. So like I said, so this is one of their main concepts that they believe in Hinduism. They also believe in something called polytheism, right? How is that different from monotheism? Any ideas?
Multiple gods?
Yes. Multiple deities. Good. And so that's the whole main difference between Hinduism and Islam. They also believe in something called pantheism. Yes, so everything is sacred, essentially, okay? Because it came from God. So, you know, if you're worshipping the creation, then you're worshipping God, right? That's an essence of it. So, again, how is that different from monotheism or what we believe in Islam? Yes, so the distinguishing fact here is there is a differentiation between Allah as the creator and the creation of Allah. We are the creation of Allah. That is distinct and different from Allah, right? So we don't worship the creation, we worship the creator alone, right? And that's the main differentiating fact. They also believe in anthropomorphism, which is quite a big word, but any ideas what anthropomorphism means? Animals that act like humans. That's part of it, but I'm talking from a theological perspective in Hinduism.
Giving the deities human function.
Yes, so the humans become deified. So you know in Islam, we have a very clear line between Allah as the creator, the one that we worship, right? That has divine powers, and the creation, right? And the two don't cross. But in Hinduism, with this idea of anthropomorphism, you have the idea that the God becomes part of the creation, right? So it morphs down. So you have God-men. So this idea of having these multiple gods in Hinduism is a manifestation of God in human form. And so in Hinduism, you'll have multiple gods and they will have multiple different roles, you could say, right? And an example of this is the Trimurti in Hinduism, which is a form of a trinity, believe it or not. Hinduism has a trinity, which is called the Trimurti. The three idols. Anyone know what that is? I know you know, so you might as well tell us, uncle. So you have Brahma, right, which is the creator. You have Vishnu as the sustainer, and you have Shiva as the destroyer. These three make up the trinity of the Trimurti, right? And so they all have distinct functions, you know? And so again, this is different from the Christian Trinity, right? And of course, it's completely different from Tawheed as well. And I have actually a talk which is entitled Trinity versus Trimurti and Tawheed. And so maybe next time we can go into that, right, into a bit more detail. So, you know, all of these are concepts within Hinduism. Polytheism, idolatry, anthropomorphism, the idea of avatars as well, pantheism, James Cameron's Avatar. What's the avatar?
It's an alien.
Not quite an alien.
Oh, it's he uses its camouflages.
Yeah, basically avatar is, if you look at it, the avatar is, he puts on the blue suit, right? And so he's got human form, and then he puts on the blue suit, and then he's acting as if he's part of that creation. Avatar, it actually is a Sanskrit word. It comes from a Sanskrit word which means avatara. Avatara literally means coming down. So in Hinduism, if you look at some of these images of the idols and the paintings, you find that they're blue in color. You'll see like Krishna is blue. You'll see Ram is blue. You see multiple deities in blue. So if they've taken this idea, avatar from Hinduism, right? And so that's where the idea comes from. So it's important to understand that, there are over 1 billion Hindus across the world. There are over 1 million in the UK. And like you said, there's a lot in this community here that, follow the Hindu tradition, just like I did growing up, right? Just growing up, I would go and have follow these traditions, these practices, and thinking nothing of it. Because on the surface of it, like when we spoke about dharma and karma, right? It sounds like this is a good way to live. Do good deeds, and have a good life. Do good actions so you get rewarded, right? But the way that it manifests itself is different from Islam because it's essentially a polytheistic religion, right? And so for me, I used to look at these idols and I used to think, hang on a minute. Number one, like the idea of a God is supposed to be all-powerful, all-knowing, the creator. In Hinduism, you have these multiple gods that have different, you could say, powers, right? So you would go and literally, if you wanted prosperity for money, you'd go to a particular idol. If you wanted strength, you would then go to a different idol. So for different things, you'd go to different idols. So for me, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like for me, if there's a God, I should be asking God directly. But obviously, you don't question these things as a kid to your parents. You just accept it. But internally, there was a conflict that was growing. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Plus these idols, these are handmade idols. How can there be God? Right? And I've seen some of these idols like break and get old and they have to wash it. All of these things didn't make any sense. And this idea of, God coming down as a human being, again, that didn't make any sense. But you just continue and follow. So what I sort of came to the conclusion was, look, I'm not denying that there's a creator, even though the ideas in Hinduism don't make sense. There must be a God and a creator. So I'm just going to focus on that. Yes, I'll continue, going with my parents to these festivals and traditions because you don't want to upset them. But internally, I was like, no, this doesn't make any sense. Okay? And so, again, when we look at our tradition as Muslims, we see this throughout human civilization. It's no different. Who can name me some of the prophets of the past that lived in very similar environments? Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he grew up in the great Babylonian civilization, right? It was a powerful civilization that ruled for over 2,000 years. The Mesopotamian civilization. And they believed in idols. His father was a chief idol maker. But alhamdulillah, Allah obviously guided and blessed him because as an early kid, imagine a little kid, right? You have a whole civilization following this tradition, everyone. And here's this little kid and he's saying, this doesn't make any sense. How can this be God? So he would advise his father, look, this doesn't make any sense. But obviously as a kid, he was dismissed. He was dismissed. And we know the amazing story, subhanAllah, that when there was this celebration that they used to celebrate every year, the whole society would go out and celebrate it. Pretty much like Christmas today, like everyone celebrates Christmas, but they would go out of the city to celebrate it. Okay? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he gave an excuse. I'm not feeling too good. He remained behind. So here's this kid, remains behind. They go out and celebrate. They're all excited. They come back, who dare do this? So he said, let's go and ask that young boy, Ibrahim alayhi salam. He was here. Maybe he saw something. So when they asked him, what was his response? Look at the big idol, because the big idol's got the weapon. Why didn't you ask the big idol? Imagine this, a young kid, right, going to that length, thinking of a strategy like that, so that he could get his people to understand. Because when he said that, what was the response of his people? They were like, what are you talking about? The idol can't tell us anything. It's handmade. And he was like, exactly. Right? And for a moment, they realized, for a split second, they realized what this boy is talking about is the truth. But then what happens? Heritage, ego, forefathers, pride. How can a young boy just completely destroy all of our heritage with a very simple argument? No. They said, no, we're not going to accept it. Right? Because what did it mean? It meant all our forefathers are wrong. Everything we've been doing is wrong. All of our tradition is wrong. No, we can't be wrong. So they said, you know what? We'll do the simple thing. We'll make an example of this young boy so that no one dare question our authority ever again. So they make the biggest fire, so big that they couldn't get him close. So they decided to use a catapult. Right? So imagine this massive catapult. And look, brothers and sisters, these are not fake stories. This happened in human civilization. Okay? When people sometimes ponder over these stories, they don't actually realize these are actual historical human events. So I want you to imagine they're building this massive fire and they basically want to make such an example of him, this young boy. Imagine what he's feeling. A little kid being thrown into fire. Like a little kid would be scared, worried, crying, upset. Right? We couldn't even imagine doing something like that. And so we know the story. He was being flung, and Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him and says, would you like any help? And what was his response? Say louder. Yes. He said, from you, no. But from Allah, yes. Sufficient is Allah as a disposer of affairs. I put my trust in Allah. And what happened? That fire cooled. He walked out. Imagine that scene. Imagine that scene. They went to all that trouble. Then they see a young little boy walk out. They must have been scared. They were saying, what the hell? But the point is, brothers and sisters, that he had the conviction in Tawheed to go against an entire civilization and to show them what they were doing was wrong. And because he put his trust in Allah, Allah protected him. And what a great prophet, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Because his story is incredible, right? And this is what we have to understand. What other prophets do we know grew up in that sort of civilization of idolatry? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A lot of people don't realize and remember. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in Mecca, they were worshipping idols. There was idols in the Kaaba. There used to be an annual celebration where people would come and bring idols. No difference to going to a temple where there's full of idols. They would worship these idols. But alhamdulillah, Allah chose the Prophet ﷺ with the message to worship Allah alone, that this idol worship is wrong. And so, alhamdulillah, we know the story of the Prophet ﷺ. He came with the message of Tawheed. And now when we look at Arabia, right, they worship Allah alone. Idolatry was removed because it was something that is unjust. and this is something that we need to understand and appreciate, is that what is the greatest sin? Shirk. Is it adultery? Is it taking drugs? The greatest sin you can commit, brothers and sisters, is shirk. More dangerous than anything else. And so, this was the message of the prophets. Their message was very simple. Worship Allah alone and don't associate partners. And they came with arguments to show people that this worshipping of idols makes no sense. So for me, growing up, I realized certain things like that just didn't make any sense. And I decided not to obviously worship these idols, but, just try and call out to God in the way that I knew. And alhamdulillah, that's what I did for a number of years. That's what I did. And like I said, you just follow your family's traditions. But it wasn't until, alhamdulillah, I was a bit older when I was at university. Again, when you're at university, this is a great time in terms of you meet people from different backgrounds, different ideas. You're trying to figure out, what you want to do in life, which way to go. That I came across some Muslims that I was close with. But the funny thing is, I always grew up with Muslims. I remember having Muslim friends at primary school. Definitely at secondary school, had a lot of Muslim friends. I remember some of them close. Even at college, I had Muslim friends. And then at university, alhamdulillah, I came across some, Muslim friends that I had been in touch with from school. But this is it. Hidayah comes from Allah alone. Like Ibrahim alayhi salam. SubhanAllah, imagine such a rich idol worshipping environment. And he changed the whole peninsula by the permission of Allah. That Allah guided him. Same as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Arabia was idol worshipping environment. Mecca was this main city of idol worship. Imagine, after Ibrahim alayhi salam had come and built the Kaaba, it went to idol worship, and so they were guided. And alhamdulillah, what happened with me was, I remember when I was at university, I didn't know much about Islam, to be honest. I always thought Islam was the religions that the Pakistani people used to practice. My idea of religion was geographic in nature, right? So you got the Europeans and the Westerners, they're Christian, right? Because that's their religion, okay? Then you got the Far East and the Orient, the people from the Orient, they're Buddhist. Because, Buddha is a fat Chinaman, yeah? So that was my understanding. Then you had, obviously, Islam was like for the Pakistanis, and then you had Hinduism, because that originates from India, and then obviously you had Sikh. So that was my understanding. So every people had their own religion, and it's fine, It wasn't until someone actually gave me some dawah material. And basically what happened was, I had some Pakistani friends that I knew from school. Then we met up again at university, and they were actually trying to do dawah to their Christian friend. Right? They had a very close Christian friend, and they're trying to do dawah to him. So they got these dawah materials, these booklets, these flyers, and in those times you had cassettes, right? So they'd given him some, and they said, you might as well have some as well. They weren't trying to do dawah to me directly. When I read that, for me it was like, subhanallah, a light bulb went off. Because the idea of Allah is something that I always knew was true. Because remember, I come from a Hindu background. The idea of God in Hinduism is idol worship. Many idols that look like humans. Some of them look like animals, right? And for me, that just didn't make any sense. But I always believed that there was one true God. And especially when I read Surah Ikhlas, when it mentions in Surah Ikhlas, say He is God. the one and only, one God. Yes, that's what I believe. The eternal and absolute and self-sufficient. Absolutely, God is self-sufficient. That's the God I would believe in. He begets not, nor is he begotten. God has no parents and has no offspring. Definitely yes, because this idea of humans as God, as offspring of God, didn't make any sense. That's one of the reasons why when it came to Christianity, I couldn't accept it. This idea of a human God-man that has divinity, Jesus, that couldn't sit right with me because I already came from that background. You had Krishna, Ram, Shiva, you had the Trimurti. All of these were like human in nature when you looked at them. So I couldn't accept Christianity. And then when it says the final verse of Surah Ikhlas, and there is none like unto him. There's nothing like God. Anything you can imagine, that's not God. That made it for me. That was it. This is God. This is the true understanding. SubhanAllah. And so I listened to the cassettes. I read, some of the Quran. I remember watching a lot of, videos like, the late Ahmed Dida, rahimallah. Used to watch a lot of those videos. It made a lot of sense. And so now I've got a conflict. This makes sense to me now, but it's Islam. It's the Pakistanis' religion. And what do we know about Indians and Pakistanis? They're like enemies, right? SubhanAllah. So now I have to embrace the religion of the enemies. But no, it wasn't like that. But it was like, from a perspective of, well, actually it is like that when it comes to parents. I couldn't tell them. Like a lot of people that come to Islam, especially from a Hindu background, Sikh background, they have to keep it hidden. Because, they will tell you, that you can do whatever you want, but just don't become a Muslim. Or even the women, the girls would get this advice. They'll be like, you can date or, whatever, but don't date, someone who's a Muslim. They'll be given like, I would hear this from some family members and stuff. And so, again, this is something that when it came to realizing the truth, I had to make a decision. I had to basically either lie to myself for the rest of my life and just continue just pretending to be a Hindu or embrace Islam. And that's what I did. Alhamdulillah. I told my friends and they couldn't believe it. They were shocked. They weren't even trying to do da'wah to me. Yeah. And they were like, Allah Akbar. They were like, but then they were worried as well. Like, what are your parents going to say? We don't want any trouble. So I kept it to myself. I remember going to Regent's Park Mosque, and going inside and then, meeting the Imam in the office. And it was a very quick thing. He said, take your Shahada, gave me some books and then sent me on my way, and that was like, I've taken my Shahada. So the thing was, in those days, and it wasn't too long ago, is there wasn't many support programs for new Muslims. So I didn't know what to do, really. I was pretty much on my own. I mean, I had my Pakistani friends, and mashallah, may Allah bless them, because Allah guided them. But when it came to the practices, they weren't too sort of clued up either, I remember going to Jummah on a Friday with them, right? I had no idea what's going on, but all I was like, you listen to the sermon, you do the prayer, and then you guys you can go and have you can go and eat together now, get some burgers or pizza together. And then obviously you fast during Ramadan, and then you celebrate Eid. So that was my extent. So many years I used to practice Islam like that. And then eventually, I told my parents, and they weren't too happy with it, but they accepted. But my understanding of Islam was deficient again when it came to the actual everyday practice of Islam. And it wasn't until like 2008, 2009, that when we had the financial crash, because I used to work in the city as a contractor, right? I used to work in Canary Wharf, not far from here, get those big IT contracts, and everything was good. But when the financial crash happened, obviously they started laying off contractors first. So it gave me time to sort of think about, what I want to do. Even though I was making good money, I was working in these top sort of banks, something was still missing. And it was about that time when, YouTube was starting to get popular. Then you had a lot of these series that were being published on YouTube on Purpose of Life. I remember going through some of them, and then I realized, subhanAllah, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not practicing Muslim. I don't have a connection to Allah. I'm not performing what I need to perform. And so, again, this is all the plan of Allah. Everything is the plan of Allah, alhamdulillah. Because what happened was, my sister, right, she was just finishing off university, her master's, and she was a fully practicing Hindu. A fully practicing Hindu. And Leicester has a big Hindu community. So she would go to the temple and she would do all of these things. And she had finished her master's and she had just come back. And at that time I was having my reawakening or, looking into Islam properly, or watching all of these videos. I was like, okay, you know what? I need to get copies of Quran, give them to my brother and sister. So remember going on eBay on that time, there was no Amazon. I went on eBay, ordered a couple of Qurans, left one on my brother's side table, my sister's side table. And I was like, hopefully they would read it. So my sister came back, and she was training to be a school teacher because that was her passion. She always wanted to be a school teacher. She loved school. She loved kids. So she was doing her training for teaching. And I remember, when you do, what's it called, the teacher training that you do for 2 years? PGC, yes. So she was doing her PGC. And, when you do your PGC, you get a placement at 2 schools, right? So her second term, what happened was this. It was a normal week, and the weekend was coming up, so I was looking forward to the weekend, right? I finished work. My sister came to me, and she said, I've been invited to this program over a weekend, and they have this free session on Friday. Do you mind coming? Because I'm not too sure. And, so I said, okay, what is it? She said, it's a program about Islam. So I was like, it's going to a talk about Islam. I couldn't believe it. And obviously I didn't know much at that time, okay? And so it was at one of these fancy hotels and on the Friday. So I'd never been to anything like this. I'd never seen anything like this. So I turn up and I'm shocked. There's hundreds and hundreds of people, right? And the sheikh was from Egypt. And it was amazing. The Friday I was like, wow, they gave us the booklets. He had an amazing recitation. It was basically about the Sirat, in the afterlife before you get into Jannah, right? Crossing the Sirat. That was the whole journey. And what he told me, it was you could imagine, hearing this for the first time, beautiful Egyptian recitation and a professional environment like that, hundreds of people. And so I was like, this is amazing. So I told my sister, obviously, because I was only invited to the Friday, don't worry, it's going to be amazing. Just enjoy your time. If you have any questions, just ask the sheikh. Yeah, and then I left her to it. So obviously Saturday, Sunday, I'm doing my thing. And then the sheikh relays the story to me afterwards, what happened. So what happened was, the sheikh, he came on a Friday, and as he does, obviously, he's looking at his audience, getting ready to deliver his course. So when he's looking at the sea of people, obviously you've got the brothers at the front, the sisters at the back. He looks at the back of the where the sisters are. MashaAllah, everyone's wearing hijab and, abaya. And then he noticed there's one sister that's not wearing hijab. And he was like, you know what? I need to talk about the importance of hijab and, modesty. Try to advise. He said, I'll do it in the Q&A session. Right? And obviously, my sister then starts asking questions. So my sister's starting asking questions about Islam. Then the sheikh realizes, subhanAllah, she's not even Muslim. But the sheikh, he's a da'i. So he goes straight into dawah mode. Yeah? And what happens is, he starts asking her questions about her belief and starts putting it on her. Right? And mashallah, he's, really good da'i. By the end of the conversation, and you can imagine there's hundreds of sisters there sitting and dawah's happening. And like, he says, well, if you agree with everything that I say, why don't you take your shahada? And then she took her shahada in front of hundreds of sisters. And I'm not there. Right? I get a text message saying, yeah, I was at the thing and I've just decided to embrace Islam. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And this is the plan of Allah. And imagine, look, Allah will guide the people. She was a practicing Hindu. She was going to temple. But one of the most frustrating things she found was there were no solid answers to basic questions. It was always a philosophical answer. Concepts that were contradictory. And I remember when I became Muslim, and then in 2008, when I started, wanting to become more practicing, I made a dua to Allah that, can Allah give me, someone to help me? Like marriage. I was thinking about marriage. But the way that Allah answered that was by converting my sister. Because she became a rock. As soon as she embraced Islam, she donned the hijab and abaya. And she's a school teacher. Right? And it was half term. So imagine, right? She comes back and the teacher and the kids are like, Miss, what happened? What I didn't realize again, and look, this is the qadr of Allah, that her mentor, believe it or not, in that school, basically seeing that she was interested in Islam, and over the period of those months, he was doing dawah to her. SubhanAllah. So all of these factors combined, SubhanAllah, is the plan of Allah. But where did it begin? Hidayah comes from Allah, but it doesn't just fall out the sky. It requires effort and dawah, discussion. With me, even though I knew Hinduism was wrong, I didn't know what the right path was. I believed in God. Someone gave me some materials. That was a means for me to understand. And of course, every person goes on their journey. Same with my sister, practicing Hindu. But someone gave us some information, had an engagement. And this is how Hidayah comes to people. Alhamdulillah. And so what happened was, after that, my sister became Muslim, I became Muslim, I was Muslim, and I wanted to become more practicing. Then we went to a few other Islamic events, and then we got invited to a new Muslim retreat. We went on that, and that's where I learned the basics of what I needed to do. And that was 2010, alhamdulillah. And then I started basically getting involved volunteering. In 2012, we had the Olympics, Dawah campaign, right? And then I was like, subhanAllah, Allah guided me. Allah guided my sister. I know there are millions and millions of people out there that are just like me. They know what they believe in terms of their family tradition doesn't make sense. But they don't deny God. They know that there's a creator. They just need the message. And what did Ibrahim alayhi salam do? That's all he did his whole life. From an early age, he went out there and conveyed to his people that were idol worshipping community to worship Allah alone. And then he went across to different lands and places to convey that same message. And Allah kept on testing him. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ grew up in an idol worshipping society. And he went and shared the message of Tawheed and basically clarified who we need to worship. And then that belief in worshipping idols was removed from society because the people realize this makes more sense. And so, alhamdulillah, I've been blessed to be, number one, be guided, to Islam by the permission of Allah. When you look at, the journey, I see a lot of my family, friends that are people who won't speak to me, and they're still on the same thing, And SubhanAllah. So hidayah is from Allah, but we have to put the effort in because we know there are no more prophets to come, And what's going to happen is these people, they're going to ask us, how come you were my best friend? How come you were my neighbor? How come you were my colleague? You said that, you helped me out in the dunya. But the most important thing, you didn't tell me about. What kind of friend are you? What kind of neighbor are you? What kind of colleague are you? What kind of human being are you? And that's what it's all about, brothers and sisters. Is going out there and doing what we can just to share the message. Being a good Muslim in the community. Just by our actions. Then using that as a means to strike up a conversation. And this is what the messengers did, We had all of these previous messages that did the same. And I know people are afraid and they're scared because there's a lot of propaganda out there against Muslims. There's a lot of Islamophobia. But the way you can change that is by your actions. And there's obviously a famous story of the narration of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he was helping the old lady. Right? He was helping the old lady. She didn't know who he was. Right? And she was so happy and so pleased, right, that she wanted to give him advice. And what was the advice she gave him? She said, listen, thank you so much, but be wary of a man who's causing disunity in our community. Stay away from him. He's bad news. Because she had heard all of this propaganda. What did the Prophet ﷺ do? Did he try and, debate her? No. He just smiled. And then, as he was walking away, she was like, oh, sorry, what's your name? I didn't get your name. Thank you. And she said, when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned who he was, what did she do? What did she do? She took a shahada immediately. Why? She's like, this is the person that they're talking about? No way. No way. What they say about Islam is what they're saying about this man. I've experienced him. He helped me. This is a good man. Whatever he says, this is a man of truth. Took shahada. So when you're going out there and you're engaging society, helping as a Muslim, doing good deeds, helping your neighbors, trying to make this place better, people will see it. They will experience it. And they'll say, you know what? No way what they say about Islam is true. Because I met Muhammad, I met Zubair, I met Imran. These are good people. They're always helping out. They're always trying to make, the area a better place for us. They're cleaning up the streets, removing drugs, right? They're helping out the youth. These are good people. And that's how we can change civilization and societies, brothers and sisters. But hidayah comes from Allah. We just have to take that step. And that's what the prophets did, And it's important to remember that not only that is it our duty, but there are great, great rewards when it comes to doing dawah. Anyone know any rewards linked to dawah? Yes? Yes. Yes. So if you call someone to good and they act upon the good, you will get the reward of that good without that reward diminishing. So imagine you call someone to Islam, they embrace Islam. Every time they do an act of ibadah, Every time they do wudu, every time they do salah, every time they recite Quran, they do sajda, even they go Hajj Umrah, you're going to get the reward. Then they're going to have kids, right? Get married, have kids. All of that will be on your scale of good deeds. Who wouldn't want that? Very simple thing. But just by doing our effort. And no one is saying you have to do dawah full time. Just do what you can. And if you can't, then support the dawah. Support those that are doing the dawah. So that this message of La ilaha illallah can spread across the world. And that's what we focus on as part of my journey. When I got involved in dawah, I quickly found it was so addictive. Just going out there and having a conversation with someone, and just engaging in conversations, because you're just trying to talk to them, and people want to, you'd be surprised, people want to talk because they can't talk about these things in their normal spheres. Purpose of life. What's your purpose of life? Oh, I've never really thought about it. Or what do you think is going to happen to you when you die? Wouldn't you want a great reward like a paradise? Right? So you can engage in many ways. And that's, something that I got involved in. Then we basically also have dawah materials which help explain what Islam is. We've done these amazing, dawah campaigns. We've got one coming up. You see Brother Zakir at the back. He's wearing the What's Your Goal, mashallah, hoodie. Yeah, alhamdulillah, that was part of the World Cup. We were there in 2014, Brazil. 2022, we were there in Qatar again. We had a massive campaign. We had over 1,000 people embrace Islam in Qatar. And we had 29 days full days of dawah. And it was an amazing experience. Alhamdulillah. Expanded. We're over 35 countries, 400 full-time duat. We do online. And so we do a lot of good things. But you can, just do your bit. Even if it's just making dua. But, try and get involved. Try and get some of that reward. It will change the demographic and you can, really benefit from it as well. And alhamdulillah, this is it, isn't it? We want to basically do something that not just benefits others, but also ourselves. Another benefit of getting involved in dawah is you yourself will become closer to Allah. Guaranteed. Because you're making Allah number one. You're talking about Allah. So you yourself want to become more practicing. You'll do more dhikr of Allah. You do more dua of Allah, you'll do more ibadah, you read more Quran, right? You try and use these things. Because remember, it was the greatest men on earth were involved in dawah. And this is it. We want to meet the prophets in Jannah, right? And so that's sort of in a very short nutshell, inshallah. Yes, okay. Have a few questions. So the brother's ask is the Prophet Muhammad mentioned in the Hindu scriptures. When it comes to this, I think there's a difference of opinion. I think, the famous talk, in the debate, he mentions this, that the Prophet is mentioned in the scriptures, and they're from a tribe of people that are warriors, that are meat eaters. And again, if you look at, the history of the Muslims, that's what we are. So, Allah knows best. But I think what's important is, I think in all traditions, all major religions, they talk about this final prophet. You have it in Christianity, right? This idea of the final prophet coming, that Jesus, Isa alayhi salam mentions, and other traditions. So the thing is, these things are good to mention, brother, but there's no consensus, like 100%, certainty that this is mentioning the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I think what's important is when we're talking to Hindus and sort of trying to do dawah to them, I think the main point of sort of conversation should be, the topic should be around the concept of God. This is what Ibrahim alayhi salam focused on, right? This is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam focused on, right? This concept of who Allah is, who is really worthy of our worship. Because when you logically and rationally break it down, it will make more sense that, an idol as a god makes less sense then a creator that is eternal, one that is different from and apart from the creation. And he is the creator. That's what makes more sense, And again, it's probably the last civilization in human history that's still holding on to these concepts, right? Because Europe used to be massively pagan before Christianity. They had a lot of idol, worshipping practices, right? If you go to the British Museum, you see something. But these are redundant ideas now. They don't believe in this because something else came that made more sense to them, right? And so, again, I have a Dawah training course on how to give Dawah to Hindus. What's really interesting is, like I mentioned before, that I thought Islam was a Pakistani religion. If you were to take a Hindu, a Sikh, and a Muslim, right? Desi, I'm talking about Desi Muslim, yeah? And put them and just look at their behavior and the way they dress, the food that they eat, even the language that they speak, it'll be the same. So what I'm saying is they're so close when it comes to these things. But what's different is obviously the most important thing, which is the belief in Allah and not committing shirk. That is the most important thing. That, we focus on Tawheed when we're talking to Hindus. The elimination of shirk, very important. But then also having an amazing experience. Because, Hindus, they're very nice people. They're very sort of friendly, accommodating people. They'll be very agreeable when you have conversations. They're like, yes, that makes sense. So you want to try and use your best characteristics like the Prophet ﷺ did when speaking to someone. You don't want to antagonize them. Because what does Allah say? If you attack their gods, what will they do? So it's counterproductive, You want to slowly break down these ideas, develop a good relationship. That's what happened to me. Before I knew anything about Islam, I had friends that were Muslim that had good characteristics, that I trusted. I became like part of their family, very close, And it was like when I developed that trust with them, when they gave me the information, obviously it's all plan of Allah, then I took it. But if the trust is not there, then they're not likely going to take the information from us. So it's important to remember that as well. Yes. Was Indonesia Hindu? I'm not too sure about that. Obviously we know when it comes to Islam that trade was the main way that they embraced Islam. But I think they have, maybe it was, because when it comes to Hinduism, and maybe I should have clarified this at the beginning, Hinduism is not one religion. It's almost like saying monotheism. Right? Each region in India has a different interpretation of how to practice Hinduism. They have different idols. They even have different practices. They even have different celebrations. But the core concepts, idolatry, pantheism, the belief in anthropomorphism, these are within Hinduism. And then you have dharma, karma, the idea of moksha, the life cycle, birth, life, death, birth, recycle. These are very similar. Absolutely. And India, as part of Hinduism, you have the caste system as well, which I didn't speak about. But yeah, again, it's best to focus on the concept of Allah. Because a lot of the Hindus are actually very highly educated. They're like in medical fields, computer, electronic fields. So they're very logical when it comes to these things. There is definitely, and it's part of my training that I do, that when it comes to, because there's a lot of history when it comes to India, and we don't use enough of it when it comes to India and Islam. We were there over 1,000 years. We're still there. The great Mughal Empire society was in India, right? When India reached its peak in terms of, economic GDP is when the Muslims were there in charge. But absolutely, there is a story, and people say it's very valid, that this king, he saw the splitting of the moon. And what happened was, he had been told that this was because of a prophet in Arabia. And the story goes, he traveled there to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and either on the way there or the way back, he caught an illness and died. But he told his people that he had embraced Islam. He told his people, go back and build a masjid. And that masjid was built during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you go to South India, that masjid, even though it may be rebuilt, it still stands there. I'd have to check my training. It begins with P. Give me 1 second. Because when it comes to Islam and India, most people go by the story of Muhammad ibn Qasim, the military conquest, right, which was a bit later. But basically, this king, Cheraman, his name was Cheraman. So the mosque was established in 629 CE, and it was Cheraman Juma Masjid, and you can see it still exists today. Right, established it in 629 CE, and that's obviously well before Muhammad bin Qasim going as a military conquest. But then obviously a lot of history in Islam in India. That you have the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughal Empire, even the Yemeni traders, when they went there as well. So again, there's this rich tradition, alhamdulillah, that we can always pull to when we're talking to from a Hindu background. Yes, Chairman Paraman, yes, alhamdulillah. Yes, so when it comes to, because you have to remember the Indian civilization, the Indus civilization is quite an old civilization. So historically, they would have a lot of battles between the Persians. So you'd have the Persian Empire on one side, and you have the Indus or the Hindu Indian, and so they would battle a lot. So they would have these swords. So the split sword apparently comes from India, with the two ends at the end. So yeah, it was used, I guess, by some of the early Muslim fighters. Okay, the battery's good, guys. So Jazakallah khair, inshallah, alhamdulillah, really appreciated taking the time to talk about my journey. And if you have any questions, you can contact us, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.